Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. I hope you and yours are well. Nice to have you back again. But really lots going on this week and we've got lots to talk about, so I'll not spend too long on the introductions, but it's great to welcome Angus Brendan McNeill here, the ex-SNP MP for the Western Isles, and great to have him. Been a long while since we've had on. Angus, welcome. Nice to see you.
Thank you very much, Roddy. Good to be here.
Good, and we've got the usual crew with us, Terry, Phil and Eva. Eva's back from a wee break. Are you feeling a wee bit refreshed, Eva, after your break in Sky?
Couldn't stay away, Roddy. I just missed you so much. You're
God bless your wee cotton socks. Can't blame you. But it's been, because it's a great week to be back, Eva, because it's really exciting. I'm so excited. I haven't been this excited since 2014. And that is the news that came out of Westminster, going to Westminster, and it's our John Swinney is going to apply. Well, I think he's going to apply. If he gets the vote through on Tuesday, Eva, we're going to go and ask that nice Mr. Starmer if we can have a referendum, please, sir, if you don't mind touching forelock. Are you excited, Eva?
I'm ecstatic. When you mentioned that sentiment earlier on, Roddy, and how excited you are about it, what it brought to mind was that event about that time that everybody's granny had a fight with a mangle, because this is the same level of interest, if you like. But if you look at the wording of this, I said before we started that a third year pupil doing modern studies could have written something far more direct, succinct, robust and invigorating. This is not exactly that. And it contains some hostages to fortune, unfortunately. The opener is the motions to be debated Wednesday, 20 May, and the opening sentence: the Parliament welcomes the emphatic democratic mandate for bold and ambitious reform backed by the people of Scotland at the Scottish election. Well, no, that's not what happened. What happened was the SNP got a majority of seats, and in conjunction with the Greens, if you believe they're an independent supporting party, they clearly have a majority of seats in the Parliament for independence. They do not have an emphatic democratic mandate because we know that turnout was low. We also know that the popular vote is at least controversial in the context of whether the popular vote is supportive of independence or otherwise. And that is precisely why Alliance to Liberate Scotland fought the election on the basis of a supermajority for independence. And I just wish the turnout had been far higher and that the number of votes for independent supporting parties had been over the line, had been over 50%. Because given that it's not, the wording of this motion makes it very, very easy for those in the Parliament and in the media and the general public who are opposed to independence, driving a coach and horses through this and pointing out there is not, in fact, a popular mandate for what the SNP pre-election referred to as the right to decide. So I'm glad that at least the word independence continues to remain on the lips of some politicians. But regardless of the outcome on Tuesday, it is incumbent on everybody in the movement who desires independence as an urgent necessity to get behind each and every attempt to keep it at the top of the political agenda unless and until we have the electoral event where we secure independence. And I know the others, especially Angus Brendan, will have a lot to say about what do we do if and when the Section 30 is rejected, because there can be no doubt that John Swinney's motion will be approved and passed by the Scottish Parliament with, obviously, the support of the Greens, distasteful in some regards as that may be.
And Angus, you've been a long-time critic of the lack of tactics for the SNP in this. Is this making you feel any better, or are you as downfallen and crestfallen as Eva here?
Well, I mean, I think this step has got to be done at the moment after the election. So let's do the step. Let's get the refusal. Well, it'd be nice if we didn't get the refusal. We'll get the refusal. It's what happens after that. That'll separate the parish councillors from the statespeople. I was just looking online. There is a Section 30 letter went on the 31st of March 2017 to Theresa May from, I presume, Nicola Sturgeon would be then requesting a Section 30, and it went nowhere. This will go nowhere as well, as I think I wrote about 4 times for a Section 30, various attempts at the Scottish Government, various times you've got a mandate. Every request has no consequences for the UK Government. So unless we build in consequences, it's going to be a refusal. And I can see that this group, Business, what they call Business for Scotland or something like that, or BIS, anyway, run by Gordon McIntyre Kemp, they've been saying that if we don't get a Section 30, we'll wait till the 2029 general election. So I mean, the basic chat there is you go and ask the UK Government for a Section 30, they go, or what? And you go, well, nothing until you decide to call a UK general election. Obviously, you're going to get refused at that stage, because that is just such an easy no for the UK Government, unless we build in consequences.
Yep.
And the easiest consequence is to use an election. Now, some people will say, oh, you can't use an election. Where's that written? What is required is the democratic will of the Scottish people. And to their credit, Westminster, 19 times since 1945, over countries that didn't want to become independent, did recognise elections as routes to independence. One exclusively of 23 countries, Malta, used a referendum, and 3 other countries in between used referendum and election. And in all cases, to their credit, Westminster accepted this. And what Westminster likes to think is the real way they became independent, those 23 countries, wasn't either by a referendum or by an election. It was by an act of the Westminster Parliament. So I think the first thing we've got to do is get serious ourselves. We've also got to stop demonising Westminster. The people I knew, and probably the people Phil knew, would accept democracy. And so we've got to crack on with it. But if we put in a Section 30 request and have no teeth behind that, of course it's going to be refused. And why would they accept it? Put yourself in Keir Starmer's shoes at the moment. His jacket's on a very sugary nail. Andy Burnham, Wes Streeting are all waiting to take his job. And what's the next crisis he could possibly give himself? A referendum for Scotland. Is that man in any way going to give a referendum for Scotland? He is finished the following day, definitely. So he's not going to give it. He can't give it. He's in a bind. He's in a very weak position. And therefore, it will be refused, of course. It is what we do next. As I said in the beginning, we'll separate the statespeople from the parish councillors.
Terry, I asked the question, John Swinney's doing, I think everybody knows that this is going to be a no-brainer. Do you think it's just he's done it for show, or do you think he's really serious about trying to get this referendum over the line?
The words to say I'm not going to say it now. I'm not going to say it, but there's an urge in me just to say my arse, basically, because he's not interested. He's never been interested. He's only interested in the status quo and maintaining his lovely earnings. He's doing this because he's been forced into doing it. He made the mistake of saying he was going to ask for it. And now he's got to bloody well carry it out. But he's doing it in a way to make sure that it's going to be turned down. Also, he's doing it at a time when Starmer, as Angus said, his coat is on a sugary peg and is about to fall off. And Wes Streeting is creating storms here, there and everywhere. It's lunacy to go and say, right, okay, I want the Parliament to decide, shall we go and ask for an S30? Oh, great, everybody put their hand up. You too, Q Manivan, put your hand up too, right? And they all put their hand up, and then he goes, sends a letter, right? Sends a letter to Starmer, and Starmer goes, oh, go away. There you go, son. You have a referendum. But I'm out this week, so best of luck. It's nonsense, absolute mince. I can't listen to the man anymore. I don't want him in Holyrood. I don't want him anywhere. He's useless, beyond useless. My cat could do better. Full stop.
Phil, I put out a tweet right after the election, and I said, just as Angus is saying about there should be consequences. And if John's putting in this request for a Section 30, should he not add the caveat, and if you don't give us this, when I will dissolve the Parliament at Holyrood and have an independence plebiscite. That is the kind of consequence. It's the only thing that can make them even sit up and take notice.
Absolutely. We've known a plebiscite is the way forward. I mean, Eva, Angus and Terry have covered it. A referendum is not the way to go, because we won't get one. And what have they got to lose, as you point out yourself, Roddy? Westminster have consistently refused to grant a referendum, calling 2014 a once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-generation, 20 years event, despite that right being written into the Good Friday Agreement for Northern Ireland. But the difference is that Northern Ireland cost the UK money since the Second World War, since the end of the Second World War, while Scotland remains the cash cow, the richest part of the UK, and that's why their rules are different for us in Scotland, and why they won't let us go, and why if we continue to play by their rules, we will never win our freedom. And the BBC report, you know, that John's got a plan for independence. So it must be true. Right. It's absolute nonsense. It's been well covered. You know, I'm ambitious for Scotland. Even the Scotsman saying he's vowed to hold an immediate Holyrood vote on drafting. This is prior to the election, drafting a Section 30 order for Scotland to have the power to hold a rerun of the 24 independence referendum on the first day of the SNP being returned to power. It was a fix. We don't want the 2014 referendum. Again, the mandate was wrong. It was a local by-election mandate. We don't want that. It should be, we know the rules that we should apply. It should be Scots or people who've been here at least 10 years that get to vote on that, not students and anybody else. But he's been facing accusations from his opponents of being breathtakingly out of touch, struggled to make clear when his plan for the first 100 days he talked about was making any sense. John Swinney, the same time as his first time in office, is devoid of common sense. He's devoid of the kind of decision-making, organisation and structure that Alex put in place when he was in power that proved that Scots could look after their own affairs. He's doing exactly the opposite. He's continuing what Nicola started when she was given the golden keys of independent Scotland and promptly sold them. That is what he's done. That's what Humza Useless has done, and that's what Nicola did before him. So until we get rid of these leaders in the SNP, supposed leaders, they're actually sheep. We were talking about sheep earlier, and Angus knows a thing or two about that. But the bottom line is these people will take us nowhere. Sheep are there to be led. They should be doing what they're told, not trying to tell us what's going on.
I mean, if I can take you back to 2017 and Nicola's letter, that's probably long forgotten by everybody now, but she wrote in a paragraph, in light of the above, there appears to be no rational reason for you to stand in the way of the will of the Scottish Parliament. I hope you will not do so. However, in anticipation of your refusal to enter into discussion in this stage, it's important for me to be clear about my position. It is my firm view that a mandate of the Scottish Parliament must be respected and progressed. The question is not, but how. I hope that any constructive discussion between our governments, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's been lack of teeth at every step of the way. I mean, if you think the way Salmond had boxed Clever into getting himself a one-question referendum, and there's a funny story there. I don't know if you've been aware of this funny story, but Alec told me he knew that David Cameron didn't know what he wanted, a one or two question referendum for full fiscal autonomy or for independence. And Alec ran that he wanted a 2-question referendum for a while, and everybody believed it, including his own cabinet, including a special leaker in his own cabinet, who told me it's very important. This guy couldn't keep his mouth shut to the press. He said it was very important that this guy believed that it was a 2-question referendum. So the guy was just, he wanted a 1-question referendum, and he was really, really upset. There was a 2-question referendum, and Alec was playing chess within his own cabinet, and he had them believing it was a 2-question referendum. Cameron didn't know what he wanted, but he wanted the opposite of what Alec wanted, because he thought Alec will have figured it out. So I want the opposite of what Alec wants. So inevitably, the cabinet meeting was over. The man wasn't happy. Told the press, unbelievably, Alec, confidentially, of course, Alec. Well, this is what Alec reckoned happened. Alec is determined to get a 2-question referendum. Of course, this wasn't long before the journalists' words were into Downing Street, and Cameron was adamant he was only getting a one-question referendum, which was exactly what Alec wanted in the first place. So you need a bit of guile and strategy around these things, and there's no guile and strategy since Alec left. As you can see from that letter of Nicholas in 2017, it's basically performative. I mean, I think, in fairness to John Swinney at the moment, I think he's got to perform this little step and take people with him. But it's what he does after this. I mean, do the Section 30, have your vote. You've requested it. We know where the Scottish opinion polls are at the moment. They're not at the 27% when Alec got the referendum. They're hovering up and down around the 50%. I mean, I can remember one time was it Gordon McIntyre Kemp saying in 2019, 2018, we can't do anything until we've got support at 55%. We've now effectively got that, but he kind of wants to wait another 3 years. No, I mean, I think if we're going to invigorate the people, we have the politicians at Holyrood have to look serious, and if they look serious, people will get excited. But it's what they do and the consequences they threaten the UK government with. I know people will say that in the last election we didn't get a majority of the votes. We did in 2021, and what good did it do us? I don't think people who are in favour of independence were overly enthused by this last election. But, you know, it wasn't an election for independence anyways. An election for a request for a referendum was a big constitutional mandate that the SNP had out of that election. They're doing that part now. They're requesting the referendum. That will be refused. And it's what will they do next is the real critical bit. And if they're going to say, oh, well, we'll wait until there's a scheduled Westminster election scheduled by the Labour government at the day 2 or 3 months beforehand, we're going not very far at all. And we feel that, and we put Scottish independence in amongst that to be lost by the media, in amongst all the rest of the stuff, like what Reform are doing in Devon, or what Reform are doing in Norwich, or whatever they're doing in Tunbridge Wells. You know, that's the sort of issue that'll boil to the fore. However, if you call an extraordinary Holyrood election under Section 31A of the Scotland Act, the entire world's media will be giving you attention, because the election will be about one thing and one thing only. And, you know, I did hear what Phil said. I think it was Phil about the mandate. I don't know if we can tease out in the way that Cameron did for the Brexit referendum, taking out European citizens or non-Scottish people, or whatever the definition you had for Scottish people, Phil. I think we have to stick with the Holyrood mandate. I can't see any other way around that. And people who are on that electoral roll, because it's I think impossible to tease out in Scotland. But anyway, that's a side detail. I think the important point is we get the consequences for this. We call that under Section 31A, and that then becomes the plebiscite. And, you know, from many discussions I've had with both Tory and Labour MPs over the years, they will respect democracy. That is one thing. Now, I'm not sure if Reform would respect democracy, but certainly the Tory and Labour would. And I think one of the weaknesses of our movement has been just to demonise these guys, and we haven't scared anybody but ourselves. And I know a number of SNP guys who will tell me, but you can't use an election because they won't accept it. You know, I asked Rishi Sunak one time when he was Prime Minister at the Elysium Committee, if the Scottish people voted for independence at an election, would you accept it? And he studiously avoided saying he wouldn't accept it, because how would that look internationally, that he wouldn't accept democracy? But he certainly wasn't flagging the easy way for us. That's not for him to show, it's for us to work out. And all he knew, and as Stammer knows, that if he blocks a referendum, John Swinney should be doing the partnership and blocking the use of an election on the other side, and that axis stops Scotland moving forward. Of course they're going to block a referendum. They don't want independence. The frustrating thing is Swinney says he does want independence and then blocks an election.
But here's the thing, Eva. Throughout the election, John Swinney by saying, well, we need an SNP majority, and then they can't refuse us. And then he changed his tune after it. But during the election, he was saying, well, it's vote us to stop Reform. So he actually has left Westminster so many ways that they can say no. And they're going to say no. We know that. But what do you think happens next? What will the SNP do when that inevitable, no, you can't have it, comes?
We're all quite calm and measured today, but when you think about all the things that have gone wrong in the last decade or so in the Scottish independence movement, it makes you anger or almost weep in equal measures, because we've lost a decade. We should have been building on the success of 2015 particularly, and had we done that and had the right leadership and stout hearts, we'd have been celebrating Independence Day long ago. And I always come back to thinking and saying that the best predictor of future behaviour is past behaviour. And we cannot forget at any juncture that John Swinney, although he's only been First Minister this time round for a comparatively short period, he's been in the SNP leadership since 1999, and he's been there the whole way. He's not always been obviously in the top job, but he's always been around. So he knows perfectly well what the strategies to take us towards independence are. They've been very simply and often set out by Angus Brendan and by others similarly minded and similarly capable and driven. You know, if Angus was the First Minister or Phil was the First Minister, we wouldn't be having these conversations, because the First Minister's post wouldn't exist anymore, because we'd have a Prime Minister, because we'd be independent. So what will happen? The vote will pass. John Swinney will write a nice letter, which I hope is more beautifully and forcefully crafted than that motion is. And I would like to think that the letter would take on board Angus's suggestions about consequences in the event of a refusal. But if there were a Section 30 granted, then I fear for the manner in which the campaign would be organised and run. If we allow it to be run by the SNP, we might as well forget it. The problem is that there's that disconnect between support for the SNP and support for the notion of independence. There's at least, 15 to 20% of people will never vote SNP again, but they're gagging for the opportunity to vote for independence. So I take the view that whether there's a Section 30 or not, it's incumbent upon John Swinney to create that convention that has been threatened for, half a decade? That needs to happen. But what it should be is a convention about how best to achieve independence. It should not be a convention about the right to decide, which includes within it supporters of the union, because that's the SNP's current plan. So Section 30 or not, convention of the best minds in the movement. It should include, for example, Jim Sillars. He should be invited to join. It should include Alec Neil. It should include the people who've been critical of the SNP leadership and whose credentials for independence have never been doubted or questioned. But the SNP won't want that because they're no longer in the driving seat. But that's what Scotland needs. I did a couple of tweets last night that annoyed all the right people at the right time, so we must have had something good about them. We need Team Scotland, not just because we're about to win the World Cup, but because if we had Team Scotland, we'd be driving towards independence using the best intellect and as Angus said, the guile and the craft and the foxiness that is required. And not concerned, it's what's that phrase? The lion does not concern himself with the affairs of the sheep. Well, I'm not saying Keir Starmer's a lion by any stretch of the imagination, but he's no bothering his backside about the context of any letter from John Swinney if all it contains is a request. It needs to contain ultimatums and demands and set out, this time the people of Scotland mean business, and I'm here on their behalf to tell you, you better get this done, because if you don't, we'll bring all of this down on you and we'll have that vote, we'll win it, and we'll walk away and we'll forget about things like the closure of Grangemouth, the refusal of the jobs at Ardersier, and the industrial wasteland that Scotland is becoming and will become if we continue to be tied to that damn union.
Thanks, Ray. You did say, Starmer's not a lion. I've met many people who said he's lying all the time. Oh, thank you very much.
No, man, boom, boom, king.
Okay. You get jokes and everything in this podcast. You get value for money.
Roddy, can I just take us back a few years to the 11-point plan?
Yes, they remember the 11-point plan. God bless.
The 11-point plan dovetails in with what Eva was just saying there, because what often happens in this is there's either it's my plan or no plan. So what happened with the 11-point plan was there was a plan A to have a request for a referendum. And then we would say a plan B, myself and Chris McElhenney, in case this doesn't work. Then there were two approaches to that. We don't just need plan B, we need plans A to Z, which was that other sort of way of not dealing with that. And then that wasn't really working in the October, November. And then Michael Russell came out with a sort of an exercise in surrealism, really. And I've just got some excerpts here of what Russell supported have said on the STV news at the time. Russell says that the UK government could either agree Holyrood has the power for a second referendum or agree to a Section 30 order. Something he said would put the question of legality beyond any doubt. Now, we know full well they didn't agree to either of those. So he set up a false dichotomy, a dichotomy that wasn't real at all. But he goes on to say what is absolutely not up for discussion is the fact that if Scotland votes for a legal referendum on May the 6th of the 2021 election this year, that is what it will get, proclaimed Michael Russell. The SNP government will deliver such a referendum if re-elected, and the proposal I am putting forward make that very clear. So, and he was looking for a pro-independence majority at that, and then I think the final bit I've got here is the roadmap states any attempt by the UK government to challenge the legality of the referendum in the courts will be vigorously opposed. I mean, it's got all the fighting talk of sort of the Lion and the Wizard of Oz, put them up, but ultimately they failed. I mean, and it's instructive to look back at what they did in 2017. It's instructive to look back what they did in January 2021. It's all to win little Pyrrhic victories in and amongst the movement itself. To sort of stop people being attracted by a plan B with Chris McElhenney and myself. Then at the SNP conference last year, they had, was it 43 branches or 23 branches? A high number of branches anyway.
43
was it? Who wanted a plan B. And you had the SNP, the spectre of the SNP deputy leader at the time, getting up to say that firstly we would have the situation of 2014 where we had an agreed process on an SNP majority. Now, firstly, there's been no agreed process. That an SNP majority wouldn't mean anything, or a pro-independence majority would mean anything. So that was nonsense. But the best bit I think he came out with for me was that we can't use an election because they wouldn't accept it. Now, firstly, he hadn't asked. But the crucial bit is we can't use an election. The Scottish people are meant to be sovereign, dear SNP deputy leader. And if the Scottish people are sovereign, then they can decide to be independent. If they decide to be independent, they can do that at an election or a referendum, of course, by majority. But you nor nobody else can go constraining the way a sovereign people expresses itself. And that's exactly what the SNP leadership did. They said the Scottish people are not as sovereign as they think they are because they can't become independent at an election. Well, yes, they can become independent in an election if they express that sovereignty by majority. They can do what they want, and it will be respected by Westminster. And I just wish that the SNP leadership had done that at the conference last October, probably. But they've got themselves in a weird situation, the SNP leadership, and to argue that the Scottish people can't become independent in at an election was a really stupid thing to have done. Can they get out with that? Probably can, because most people won't be dredging that up to them like I just have. But if that's their current thinking, that means they're basically going to do nothing after the Section 30 is refused, which, if the UK Prime Minister is aware of that, which probably, as I think Phil was saying, he wouldn't care either way, or was it Eva? He wouldn't care either way. He's given this no thought at all. This is going to be a letter drafted by a civil servant. He'll put his name to it, and the only consideration that Keir Starmer will have for this request will be how long does it take him to write his signature at the bottom of a pre-drafted letter by a civil servant. It may well be litter, but that's it. And as Eva was double underlining there needs to be consequences for that refusal. And unless that's there, then it's going nowhere, really. But, let's Swinney have his... But, I will give him one piece of credit. I do think that starting this off with a vote in Parliament is good, rather than just go straight to a letter. He's going to have a vote of Parliament. We're meant to be a parliamentary democracy. He'll have his vote. He'll have his majority. He'll do his request. He will then be refused, and that is what will separate the statespeople from the parish councillors, and the parish councillor would just fold at that point.
But isn't it a fact, Terry, that it's a good idea that every election that we fight from now till the day of liberation should be an independence plebiscite? It's straightforward. Every election. You're on mute and you owe me a quid, Terry.
Oh, jinx, that's typical. Right. There's no question in my mind that every election should be an independence one, because this is nonsense. It's been going on for far too long. We're all getting sick and tired of it. I'm going to die before this happens, because it's wearing me down. It's wearing everybody down. There are people not interested in independence anymore because it's taking so long. But the thing that gets me is the fact that we talk about plan Bs. What's our plan A? What's the route? What is the road we are taking? What's the mandate? What is it we're going to do, and how are we going to do it? And also, what are we going to do when Westminster says no and continues to say no? We need a threat. What's his face? Wes Streeting called us an existential threat. Let's be a threat. Let's show them that we have teeth. Let's show them that we can bite. Let's bite their bums and get independence. I'm fed up with it. Are you not? Everybody is. I don't know anyone who isn't. I've got children who have grown up, have been small infants and are now bloody grown-ups who've waited for independence. There's no more. Let's get independence for our people and get ourselves into the world instead of this hanging on some lunatic's coat's tails. No, thank you. No more.
Quite right.
I'm reminded of Jack Straw, who said that one of the reasons for keeping the UK together was so that London Westminster politicians could have their seat at the UN Security Council. Child poverty and fuel poverty in Scotland didn't really matter. The fact that we didn't have a fund for the future like Norway didn't really matter. It was all to do with prestige for a few individuals at Westminster, and very sort of monarchical, imperial style thinking there from Jack Straw. But we've an opportunity here. Those 23 countries I mentioned that became independent, mostly at elections and some at referendums, all did so without the UK's initial blessing. I mean, there's a lot of stuff written about how Malta couldn't possibly do it. The Times were writing all sorts of. Maltese politicians today laugh at that. But unless we take the bull by the horns ourselves and create something that the Scottish people can see is serious. I mean, people have busy lives, and when they've got other concerns in their lives, they aren't dealing with the abstract, and they weren't dealing with the abstract of independence before Alex Salmond got this referendum going in 2012, was it, or 2011? And that from that point, 27% that supported Scottish independence engaged, and before it was finished, 17-18% more were then voting for independence at 45. We've now got a floor starting around the 50%, 48 to 52 or 53. We have a campaign, we engage the people, we enthuse the people, they think about it, they look at what the UK is doing and the instability that's continuing in the UK. And yes, Wes Streeting is correct. We're an existential threat to him being Prime Minister of the UK and him being at the Security Council of the United Nations. But what we are is an existential opportunity for the people of Scotland to make lives an awful lot better than they are, and to catch up with countries around about us manifestly are doing better than the UK. I mean, there was a Tory politician berating Labour this week about the amount of people that are flying from Aberdeen to Norway to Stavanger and Bergen to work in oil, and say that it was really mismanaged. And basically, what she hadn't realised is her speech was an absolute belter in saying how well an independent, oil-rich country has been doing, rather than a country. And she was also pointing out this was a Norwegian Labour Party that was exploiting its natural resources while the UK Labour Party was closing down Aberdeen.
There's a thing. Last week, Phil, we were talking about the great Winnie Ewing, my great hero of the movement. And when she used to look for MSPs in Holyrood to say, what have you done today to advance the cause of independence? And had people at Lloyd hiding up in cupboards because he didn't know what his answer was going to be that day. He had to have a different one. But shouldn't we, our guys down at Westminster, for example, it's when we noticed it when Martin Geiler on BBC asked any unionist politician. You know, what is the legal way for Scotland to leave the union? And people don't want to talk about that. No, they don't want to talk about it. Shouldn't our SNP MPs every day they stand up at Westminster be saying to the front bench of the British government, what is the legal way for our country to secede from this union? They should become so awkward and so bullshit and force them to answer that question or deny that there's a way to do it.
Yes, definitely. We've all been seeing this for some time, and it's dawning on more and more of us. And what we saw in the local Scottish election, it's most people. This is the problem. We know this. Everybody in this programme knows this. Most people who've spoke on this programme or watched this programme know this. However, it remains a small bubble. The vast majority of voters in Scotland do not even understand how the D'Hondt system works. Most of the people are not interested, and you can't blame them. You know, we can sit here and pontificate for as long as you like about this and that and the details, but the reality is the vast majority of folk in Scotland, quite rightly, number one, looking after your family, two, getting on with your job, three, if you get a wee bit of spare time, get a wee bit of recreation in. Life goes on. Politics is for dweebs and squares like us, and that's just the reality, you know. So if you really want to understand what the people of Scotland think, I mean, I was reminded of the many of the times you say, well, what the average person wants. Well, no, what does the average person know about the D'Hondt system? I mean, Jesus, we're still putting, as Ricky Gervais joked, we're still putting labels on bottles of bleach that say "do not drink." You know, there's an argument for natural selection. Peel them off for 2 years, and then you know, you can laugh at all of that kind of thing. But the reality, your average person, it's just a human being trying to get on with all the complications in life, or being genuinely pushed away from being interested in politics and understanding the ramifications of how important voting is and what Scotland can be and the kind of Scotland we can create, because you're just trying to get by. I mean, it's disgusting. The almost 1 in 4 kids in poverty continues. The fact that people are fighting, and when winter comes again, it'll be heat or eat. It's these the drug deaths. This continues to kill the people of Scotland. That's how serious this is, and we're a proud nation. We're proud people. We hide it. We don't show it. So for me, the fact that we know this, what should drive us is unification. We have to be unified and forgive each other's transgressions, and let's not be petty. And let's understand that we need to unify under a system whereby we do the optimal for Scotland and not for our own interests. That's the problem with all these politicians. Since Alex sadly, tragically departed or was ousted, we've had politicians that are more interested in retaining their snouts in the trough than they are from freeing Scotland from the shackles that bind us. So for me, the anger I feel has got to be channeled, and we shouldn't be angry at our own. Anybody that supports independence should have our support. Anyone. And it doesn't matter what their opinion is. It's irrelevant. If we've proven that concept through 2014. The independence referendum unified us. Why? Because there was one issue: independence. That was it. And everybody, Jesus, I ended up working with Michael Fry in the right, but I looked at Aberdeenshire West, it was the right thing to do, excuse the pun, because you want the full body of the kirk. You need everybody in it. You need the Liberal Democrats for independence, Labour for Indy. You work with everybody. And there were spats and fights, but don't get too high-handed, and don't denounce people, and don't shout people down, and don't go off in one just because you happen to be passionate about something. I mean, there are many divisive. I mean, I think the whole gender recognition thing is designed deliberately to split us and split the left and split socialism, because we do care about people, but we also care primarily about women's and girls' safe spaces and women's rights. So that kind of thing, we need to be tolerant while unifying behind a single principle, which is to free the people of our nation from this union of unequals.
Phil, can I come in with a petty and divisive interjection at this?
Go on then.
I mean, I think just a number of things. You made a very good point, by the way, on kids in poverty. I mean, I think the Scottish government will boast it's the lowest in the UK, but it's twice that of Norway, Iceland, Denmark, Ireland, and that's I think the bigger point. The point I was going to make is, you know, talking the legal way to a referendum, and we should demand that from the Westminster politicians. If I can role play for a second, if I was a Westminster pro-union politician, I'm certainly not going to tell you the way to independence. And if you can't figure that out, mate, too bad. It ain't my job to tell you all you've got to do is hold an election and get a democratic mandate for independence. I do think one of the things that's quite interesting, and it shows the level of joined upness between Westminster and Holyrood and the SNP. And it was ever thus, you probably remember this as well. In Holyrood, John Swinney's going on, he's going to be asking for a referendum, and we can package that big tug, forelock, or demand, whatever, you know. But that's the narrative. They're looking for a referendum from the UK Prime Minister. However, after the King's speech, the SNP at Westminster put an amendment down for a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister. So the guy you're asking to give you a referendum, you're on the other hand, as far as he's concerned, the same organisation, which hasn't spoken to each other, as we know, this is what happens between the Westminster and Holyrood SNP, has put down a motion to put something in the King's speech, a vote of no confidence, forgetting, of course, that they're the sixth party now at Westminster. And that wouldn't really matter. But the final point I think you made, Phil, was a good one, is but a lot of this is a bubble. People aren't paying attention. I do thank you for saying that squares. I mean, I'm trying to be square all my life, and I think I've succeeded this morning.
Could I just say, Phil, as well, on your thing about bleach, I heard another one today, which was, if we, you know, the world's overpopulated, and if we want to do something about it, is just remove health and safety. And we'll get rid of 50% of the dumbest part of the population overnight. You know,
I think we're straying into dangerous territory here.
Yeah, we'll get into.
I might be in that 50%. I'm a bit worried.
There you go. But on this, I've said all along, Eva. From shall I say, one dweep to another dweep, Eva. The British Union has never been weaker, and that's the time we should strike.
Yeah, good point.
But here's I said after the election that one of the good things about it that people couldn't see about having 17 reform MSPs is that they are going to be exposed and scrutinised. And I don't know if you've all been following what happened with the biggest party down in the Kirklees and down in Huddersfield is Reform. They took 30% of the vote, 29 of the seats, and in the council it's mayhem. And this is coming to Holyrood, folks. But here's the leader of the Reform, who's the leading party in Kirklees.
I don't understand the Constitution. I don't understand what standing orders are, what they're made up of, nor do I understand what an amendment is. We might vote for something that we don't understand at the moment. Even if you were to slow down and describe it properly, we don't understand the Constitution, we don't understand the standing orders.
I do not believe this is in any way democratic.
We understand that just because we don't understand it, that it may not be constitutional, but we are at a disadvantage and we do not necessarily know what we are voting for.
Can I just say, I think it's absolutely unfair for any councillor that's been elected, newly elected, however it is, I was in the council 18 months ago. When you are elected, you have to prioritise educating yourself on how to be the best councillor and representative for your area. That's on you. To call that, I'm sorry, but to call that unconstitutional is absolutely incorrect and it's not right. And we will also make sure that our residents are absolutely aware of who has competence in this chamber and
And the other thing is, Eva, since the election 2 weeks ago, Reform have lost 99 councillors. They've either been kicked out of the party, they've either had to resign. There was a couple that turned up for work and went, oh no, I'm not for that. And they just chucked it, and there's going to be by-elections everywhere. Now, we put 17 of them into Holyrood. They're about to come under scrutiny. I think, if nothing else, it could be a quite amusing few months.
Less of the wee, Kimo Sabi. It was the SNP that put Reform in there, with their both votes SNP mantra, make no mistake about it. There would have been some of them, but not as many of them. I don't know what to say about that. It's at first you think it's funny, and then you realise how tragic and positively dangerous that is, to have people who think it's okay to admit in public that you haven't got a clue why you're there or where you're supposed to begin. I mean, it's absolutely terrifying. Yeah, I think what's also a concern is John Swinney saying that he's not going to be speaking to Reform. I thought that was very unfair on the people who had democratically elected Reform MSPs, and it's not a good sign. In terms of the bigger picture, though, that inability on the part of these Reform people to understand protocols and processes is not unique to Reform. And that will become ever clearer when you watch the pantomime at Holyrood unfold in the next few months. There are people there, particularly some elected from party lists, that very many electors would not have voted for if it was, say, first past the post, either because they knew nothing about them or what they did know they did not like. So this, if you think the last 5 years were bad, hold on to your hat. It's only going one way until there's more competent government than we've currently got. What I was thinking about earlier on, though, Roddy, to slightly backtrack, as I know you love me to do, John Swinney's motion on independence has, I think, 4 amendments lodged. One of them is from Ross Greer, and you kind of switch off when you see the word progressive appearing in it because you know exactly what that means. But the other 3 are from Alex Cole-Hamilton, in brackets, Beth, Russell Finlay, and the man who would be the next First Minister, Anna Sarwar. And what all 3 amendments say is the SNP should get back to the day job and forget about daydreaming regarding independence and look at fixing the NHS, tackling child poverty, reindustrialisation, the economy, public services, blah, blah, blah. And the easy answer for the SNP to all of that is none of these things will be able to be fixed permanently and properly in the absence of independence, in the absence of, as Angus mentioned earlier, an oil fund like the Norwegians have. So it's a bit rich of the unionists to be saying that independence is off the table when they're the folk that spoke about the constitutional question all the time in the run-up to the election and pointing out how uncertain it would be. So the people of Scotland are listening to anything out of that Parliament next week. The strongest message that they can give John Swinney and the unionists, if you're an independentista, is that Scotland is not too wee, it is not too poor, but we will be too stupid if we don't keep the pressure on John Swinney to deliver, particularly with that concerted effort that we've all spoken about and the absolute need for a united campaign.
Yeah, here's the thing, Terry, the people rightly get fed up with the Tory party's government. And they thought, oh, this is terrible, it's desperate. And they jumped to Labour, thinking that's the answer, we'll go to Labour. And within a very quick month or so, they'd realised that they'd made a mistake. And now they've jumped to Farage and his crew, because the people are desperate for change, not just in Scotland, but throughout the UK. And as I say, the union has never been weaker. This is the time for us to step up to the plate and say, here is an alternative, and here's how we achieve it. Surely that's what we should be doing.
First of all, I'd like to say I feel suitably chastened by Phil. I'm going to try to be as nice as possible to everybody in the whole world in future. I'm thinking of becoming a green and changing my sex at the same time. I thought that would be fun, right? But I think it's all right. I'm the sort of the vox populaire in lots of ways. I just say what I think. And if I think a thing is awful, I tell you it's awful. I can't say any better than that. That's it, straight. However, this whole mince that's going on is driving me literally round the twist. I actually liked that wee councillor. I thought she was great fun. She had the balls to stand up and say, I don't know. I've no idea. Would somebody please help me? That's the way I was last week, trying to do my electoral return expenses. I was completely cracked. There are lots of things that we don't know, but what we do know is that we want independence, and what we need is a concrete plan to get there. and how do we get there? Reform are like, I met quite a number of reform people, quite a number of them, and they were all charming, absolutely charming, good liars, but charming. However, they all looked like Mormons. I don't know if you've noticed this. Honestly, they could come to your door and you'd be like that. Oh, where did I sign up? You're dead nice. I think they all get the same suit. Even the women, they all have the same suit and the same hairstyle, and they're very nice. And a lot of them completely and utterly doolally. And that's what's happening just now. The reform doolally ones are being really doolally. The ones that are extreme are being sussed out. Eventually, they'll be left with a couple that are reasonable and can actually hold a conversation or whatever. But we're not interested in them. I don't think that they're the problem. I think the problem is that people have got fed up, scunnered with Labour, Tory, etc., with the Westminster government, fed up with John Swinney. I'm sorry, I'm going horrible about him again. Fed up with John Swinney and his SNP. They want something that they can put their belief in, and God help them, they've put their vote into the Greens as well now. They're looking for somebody that they can trust. We have to provide that, and we have to provide it with getting rid of Swinney and all the rest of the loonies that are in there just now. Sorry, I'll be back to being nice later on, Phil, I promise.
I just like to say that many of the Mormons I know do vote for independence, so we should bear that in mind as well. I mean, I think one of the other things that we should bear in mind at this moment in time, that Reform Councillor was quite interesting, by the way. That Reform Councillor was doing what she thinks, she's reflecting back what other people would feel. Other people might feel bemused in that situation, not really understanding what's going on. She's playing and mirroring that. Where the clip is really useful is the last bit at the end, which I presume would be a Labour councillor telling her that ignorance wasn't unconstitutional; it was just ignorance. And you know, it's that correction of reform that's important. But you know, we've got an interesting window at the moment in Scottish politics. We've got the pre-Burnham moment, and Burnham, of course, has rewound on his Brexit stuff. But let's say Burnham becomes Prime Minister. I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility that Burnham, and you know, played football with Andy Burnham. I don't think that Burnham, not beyond the bounds of possibility that Burnham would actually reverse Brexit if he became PM. And Burnham is sharp enough to shut up just now about it. But if Burnham is in the saddle with his hands on the reins of the horse, he might be going a different direction. And we know the opportunity that Brexit has given Scottish independence for the last 10 years, an opportunity we haven't taken. We are also at a moment possibly between or before reform. And who knows what reform might do to devolved parliaments as well if they took power at Westminster. And, you know, the one window and the one power we do have is to call a Holyrood election. Now, if Holyrood was abolished by an act of the Westminster Parliament, because remember, Holyrood is only a devolved Westminster Parliament. It isn't the Scottish Parliament, as we gloriously like to think it is, or title it the Scottish Government or whatever. And that was another thing Alex said to me. They all thought I was going to call myself the Scottish Prime Minister, and none of them saw that I was going to, rather than call it the Scottish Executive, was called it the Scottish Government. But these are just terms. Ultimately, what underpins that is Westminster, and reform could come in and get rid of that. So, you know, this moment that the SNP think they have can go forever, and we'll call it, you know, there are some 2-decade unionists in the SNP. I wouldn't shame them and name them here, but I've called them that to their faces. Some people who don't want anything to do with independence till 2050, and I call them 2-decade unionists if I'm speaking to these, and the 2 or 3 of them are chaps. So it is a man thing that I know. A few have told me that strategies for independence was above their pay grade when they were MPs, which I did find shocking. I think I had a bet with some of them in whatever year, but I lost the spreadsheet when I didn't claim the bet on them all. It started off with a bet in Stuart Hosey. I think Dave Dugan was next, that there wouldn't be a referendum in 21 or 22. Stuart Hosey, to his credit, did pay up, and I didn't get around to claiming the other 17 or 18 who were following what Nicola was saying. One wouldn't bet with me because he thought I was going to publicise it later, which I wasn't, but I was just trying to teach them all a lesson privately. And the final point I'd like to just raise, and what I've heard there just now, is, you know, the both votes SNP, and we said it gave us extra. Yes, we've watched in the sort of the remnants of Alapa to find out who they were. There were 8 Reform MSPs, 5 extra Labour MSPs, and 2 extra Tories. And in the Highlands, we got Max Bannerman, a guy I knew personally and kind of got on quite well with when he was in the Tories. You see him as a researcher in Westminster. So it's again important just to say that, in that when I knew him, he certainly was no demon. Because there is a tendency we can demonise people. But I'm just saying that as an aside. But the ones they are in Central: Amanda Bland, Angela Ross in Edinburgh, Kim Schmulian in Glasgow, Julie McDougall in Mid Scotland and Fife, Mark Simpson, Senga Beresford in the south, and David Smith in the west. They're all the Swinney assists in both votes SNP. The Swinney assists in Labour are Jenny Young, Catherine Sangster, Paul Sweeting in Glasgow, Joe Long and Joe Fagan. And the brilliant Swinney assist in both votes SNP, the Tories, is Douglas Lumsden and drumroll Stephen Kerr in Mid Scotland and Fife. And I don't know if Stephen Kerr realises that he owes his place in the Scottish Parliament to Swinney's both votes SNP, but he does. So
he will know. He will know shortly. Trust me, now that I've got that information, he will know.
But you know, there are opportunities at the moment, and there's an actual lack of urgency. And there's, going back to what Martin Luther King said, is taking the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. And if that is their plan for the 2029 presumed election, that means nothing's happening for a year or two after that. And we don't know who's in power. We don't know if the Scottish Parliament will exist to do anything about it. What do you do after 2029? Ask for another referendum? You know, how do you ultimately give this teeth? So 2029 comes along and we stand for whatever, and we do or we don't get whatever, or it's lost in the media. It's just a foolish thing to do when the fierce of the, instead of using the fierce urgency of now, and we have an opportunity right now. And I think Brexit, Burnham, and Reform are sort of moving parts in all this.
Yeah, you know, Phil, I believe that, you know, Reform are not the problem; they're actually a symptom of the malaise in British politics, as I say, of the desperation. But some good information come out. This is in the English elections, that, you know, the concept was, oh, they're taking Labour votes, but in fact, that's not the case. They've actually been taking more, well, obviously, as we thought, Conservative votes more than Labour votes. So they're a bigger danger to the Conservative Party.
Yeah, I mean, that's crystal clear. So this is England's local elections, we need to remember. And it's the Tories to Reform. Over 2/3 of those moving to Reform are from the Tory party. And of the Tory vote, 1/3 of the Tory vote went to Reform. And the Green vote was the big winner in England. But that's Zach Polanski. And that was also significant in the rise of the Greens in Scotland, because it is a national movement after all. There's no such thing as the Scottish Labour Party, etc., and the Greens. You know, that's just one big thing, really, when you think about it. But I mean, going back again, this ties into what we were talking about.
What do you mean by a national movement, Phil?
Well, I just think the whole concept for voters, Green, just it's more of a marketing tool than it is serious policy. Most people don't read serious policy. What it does, it panders to the majority of the people who think Green is good, and when they see what's presented on television, and let's face it, mainstream media owned by 6 billionaires and mostly coming from London, project Zach Polanski as the new hero. You don't hear much about Ross Greer or the details if you're not paying attention. And most people are not paying attention. So, you know, because every time I speak with folk that I deliberately go to, they're outside the bubble that we're all in, like I'm talking to guys, I want independence, so I voted SNP 1-2. I had to explain the haunt. And it still didn't stick because he's not interested. Most people, they're just getting on in my life, and I don't blame folk for that. I'm not criticising. What I'm criticising is us, that we have to bear that in mind. And how many people in that election there, especially the independentistas, thought that, oh no, I'm talking to the voters, they want to vote for me. You're talking to 20 folk or 50 folk or 200 folk. That's not going to get you a seat. And just because they agree with you, you're in an echo chamber. We need to get out of that. And when I look at what we've just talked about in terms of the Reform councillors, and but Angus, yourself and Terry on this, Reform are the enemies of devolution and Scotland. They will deconstruct Holyrood. And the SNP troffers will lose their positions, which is more important to them than the freedom of our country and its people. And of the working and middle classes, that's who they're the enemy of. But our enemies are ourselves. You've said it, and in fact, who said it best? And we've quoted this man a lot, Robert Bonteen Cunningham Graham, when we said the enemies of Scottish nationalism are not the English, for they were ever a great and generous folk, quick to respond when justice calls. Our real enemies are among us, born without imagination. And that's who we're talking about. Those of us who cannot see that unification is everything, that the single unifying message that worked, that has been proven, was the message that was put forward in the independence referendum. It unified us. That euphoria we felt, that the fact that we were talking and working with folk that we disagreed with on different issues, that is what makes the difference. And that is also what's defeat us, because if you are one of those that lack that imagination, you actually think that the echo chamber you speak in, that bubble, is what is real, and it ain't. We need to get out there. We need to start doing what we used to do. We need to unify and chap doors again and spread the message, because we're fighting a system that is geared up, and if we play by the rule, they continue to play by their rules, we'll lose. We have to do it differently, but we have to do it, by God.
I think that lack of imagination there is interesting. That's sort of what I felt watching the SNP conference, you know, saying that Westminster wouldn't accept a vote when Westminster has never said sort of stuff for that. That is an enemy of Scottish independence. Not using an election when you can use an election, that's certainly an enemy of Scottish independence. And you know, I'm with Robert Cunningham Graham there. My experience of the English and English politicians is, of course, they're not going to green light and give a signpost to independence. But if we've got the wit to work it out ourselves, they will accept it. Now, what we haven't got yet is the ballot box, and the ballot boxes with that majority, and therefore we can't become independent unless we have the ballot boxes with the majority. Nothing's happening. And we're hoping to get that or John Swinney's hoping to get that at a referendum. It'd be nice if he did. Let's be honest. If he pulled it off, I'd be right behind him. But if he doesn't pull it off, I want a plan B. And you know, that's where you use an election. And I think in the real world, he ain't getting a referendum, because, as we said earlier, that's the end of Stammer, and that is the end of the UK. Wes Streeting understands exactly. I remember him as a young MP as well, or a new MP. He understands exactly what the SNP can do, or Scottish independence can do. Fortunately, the SNP don't understand what the SNP can do.
The clock's beginning to beat us, but there's two things I really want to get across quickly, and I won't ask you all of them, but it has to, Eva, I can't let this week go by that at last the Equalities Commission come out with its guidance on the Supreme Court ruling, and that must have pleased someone like yourself. But did you notice that in the same week the SNP government removed, that bit keeps jumping down, removed the gender of all, so you don't know if your MSP what sex they are, on the same week as we're getting guidance to follow the Supreme Court ruling. Has
there been a vote on that, actually?
A vote on the guidance?
Aye, it was parliamentary authority that did that, wasn't it?
No, that's the guidance from the Equality and Human Rights Commission to the government. So I think it's been released but not presented to Westminster. But basically what it says is, obviously, sex means biological sex. Roddy, that didn't pass me by, because as soon as certain people were elected, I was keeping an eye on the website to see what the listings would be. And the first one that I saw was that the Green MSP, who is a trans-identifying male, was listed as female, and the other Green MSP, who says that they are non-binary, was listed as non-binary. So there was then quite properly a fair amount of correspondence, chat and communication about what rules and regulations will be in place within the parliamentary estate at Holyrood as regards access to women's services and single-sex rights. And it was as soon as all that came out that the website was altered so that you no longer have the opportunity to establish the sex, or in Holyrood's case, it was gender, of any MSP, and that's hugely important because sometimes people want to see somebody because they are male or they are female. This is important for men as well as it is for women. It's important for everybody. So the excuse from the parliamentary body at Holyrood is simply that they're reviewing matters and that the listing by sex, or in their words gender, is a legacy which is subject to review. The thing is that the makeup of the Parliament now and John Swinney's need to keep the Greens on board simply confirms that previous arguments will be coming back to bite him again. Interestingly, also in that regard, as far as I'm aware, and if I'm wrong, somebody will correct me, I think that every member of John's cabinet was in favour of self-ID. And if that's right, this does not augur well for the future. But Roddy, can I go back to the topic of the day, please?
Sure, do what you like, Eva.
We've said repeatedly that Westminster is at its weakest. Keir Starmer is obviously in difficulty. Those who may or may not replace him will have similar difficulties. But the reason that we need to seize the moment is not simply that Westminster is at its weakest. It's because also the independence movements of Ireland, Wales and Scotland are becoming to be at the strongest that they've been, perhaps in some cases ever at all, in relation to in modern history, in relation to Wales, and for Ireland and Scotland probably for centuries. So what I would like to see is the use of imagination. Think out the box. We've seen that Mary Lou MacDonald, Michelle O'Neill, the Welsh First Minister, whose name I try and fail to pronounce properly so I won't insult him, and John Swinney have all had talks. The people who support independence or unity in the Irish context should not only be having talks, we should have a Celtic convention. A Celtic convention, we can hold it in Edinburgh or Cardiff or Belfast or even Dublin. Speakers from right across the independence movements of these three countries and also from elsewhere in the world, perhaps including people from Malta. I had the great privilege of meeting Dom Mintoff once, and briefly we, in inverted commas, shared a bodyguard, but that's a story for another day. But I imagine that a Celtic convention would put the wind right up Starmer and the British establishment, especially if you had pipers like Andre Rieu had, or you have the Welsh singing Ya Mohid, and Irish dancers and, you know, Irish pipes and drums and barans. But thousands of people who support independence across the British Isles would attend events like that, and that's what's needed. Fire, drive, ambition, imagination. Bring the Celtic clans together and say to Westminster, this time we mean business, and force John Swinney to adopt the attitude that Mary Lou MacDonald, Michelle O'Neill, John Finucane have, that it is our country and we're building the projects and we're building the unity to take it back.
Can I come in? Sorry, Terry wants to come in.
On you go then, Angus.
Wes Streeting called us an existential threat.
Yeah.
He's effectively calling these Celtic nations enemies of the state. And the fact of the matter is, we are enemies of the state being Westminster. And Westminster knows that if we all join together, then they've lost us, and they have lost every penny that we give them. And they have lost control over us. They don't want that. They'll fight it. But there's 4 of us now. 4. That's right, isn't it? 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, 3. How many? I don't care. Right.
Cornwall as well.
Yes, and the Bretons as well would join in, I'm telling you.
Can I come in with another of my divisive interjections here?
We love them. We love them, Angus. We love them.
Like, I'm not really sure what we achieve if we have if we link up with the Welsh and the Irish. I think I'm going to say perhaps it's a diversion to us. Let's just go through the thought experiment here. You know, we link up with the Welsh, the Irish. They're in a language area. The Irish are in another area, as we know. we in Scotland have something to achieve, and we've got to get a majority of Scottish people. And I think Daniel Kahneman wrote a book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and I wonder if we're going into the conjunction fallacy here. It seems quite nice to join up with our Celtic brethren as such, but is it just creating headlines for leaders of Scottish independence to say silly things like John Swinney did about the Troubles in Ireland, to create headlines that make people think, oh, well, I was for Scottish independence, but my second cousin was a soldier in Northern Ireland 40 years ago, and now I'm not really for it anymore. So, we're going down this route to do something. I don't see what we're really achieving with it. I mean, if we've got a concrete achievement, then, or a concrete path to achievement, then maybe yes. But at the moment, I can't see how Michelle O'Neill and John Swinney sending a letter to Keir Starmer to do something was going to be any different to a letter from John Swinney to Keir Starmer himself. I think the path in Scotland is to stay quite clear, not to join in with people we can't fully control, forces we can't control. Remember, the Welsh, and this goes back to a critical point that Eva was making earlier, the Welsh said that the Welsh party, Plaid Cymru, said they wanted to sort out the problems of Wales before independence. Now, I agree with Eva's point that, NHS, child poverty, reindustrialisation, public services, the things she mentioned there, needs the upstream problem sorted. It's like telling a person, can you keep the carpets dry in your house? Can you keep the telly working? But don't worry that you don't have a roof and there's rain coming in. Just keep mopping up the water. Deal with the water that's coming in and keep your carpets dry. But you can't do that unless you sort the upstream problem. You can't get your child poverty sorted. You can't get your NHS sorted. You can't stop the Westminster sabotage in Ardeshir or Grangemouth unless you've got the powers to stop them. And you can't get public services to be better. So I think we've got to keep a focus on what we're trying to do. Yeah, sometimes I used to go to SNP conference and think years ago they decided that independence was a good idea back in the 30s or the 50s or the 70s, whatever. And then nothing really happened. So they started to talk about other policies. And I'm worried, and I think it's worth saying it. I could be wrong in this, and if I am, I'm happy to admit that. But a Celtic convention or whatever, does that really address the people Phil were talking about, who aren't really too bothered about the Hunt system or just get on with their lives? Does that get us anywhere, or does that risk us having to become apologist spokespeople for other parties in other parts of the current UK? That's got John Swinney into a bit of difficulty this week. It's certainly got him a negative headline this week. And is that what we want?
No, I hear what you say, but you say sending a letter to Downing Street doesn't have any effect. When the Irish send letters and packages to London, they usually pay attention, but that's another story for another day. We like to on here say that say here's why we should have independence, here's a way we can have independence, and here's a reason why we really need to get out of the union. Now,
and Roddy, just what you've said there is the risk of being involved with the censorship.
I was flippant.
I know you're being flippant, but somebody might listen to this and might try and quote that out of context. You were being flippant, exactly. But I would say to us in Scotland, we've got a job to do. We don't get a referendum. We call a Holyrood election. It doesn't matter what Sinn Féin or Plaid or the government of France does. What matters is what we do, And Westminster will accept democracy. They've proven that, and they've done that many times. But if we don't accept democracy ourselves, and if we don't give the Scottish people the democratic opportunity, we can rail about independence and moan and groan and go back to the point: are we parish councillors? Do we have parish councillors at Holyrood, or do we have statespeople? The reaction after there's Section 30, which I believe will be refused. I'll be more ecstatic if I'm wrong on this, by the way. I'll be behind John Swinney every step of the way if he's having a referendum. But if he's not, he needs to either be a statesperson or a parish councillor, and that's just what we're going to find out. And I think that's the focus we've kind of got to keep. Sorry.
I'd just like to say I'm not risking being flippant. I will be flippant. I love the idea of a Celtic convention. I just think about the dancing and the singing and the drinking. What a night that would be. Come on.
Okay, myself, Phil and Roddy and Eva are in as well. That's it.
I don't think do any harm, but good. Who knows? But we like to just leave on a more, should we say, light-hearted note. But here's something which is light-hearted but also serious. Now I can address this particularly to Angus and Philip, who have been in Westminster. Now this week, Heather Hannah, whatever her name, the Green MP, she made, I thought, something quite poignant, and she was ridiculed and laughed at the Westminster, the old boys club. What about this
in
guy?
Gorton and Denton, we have to pay full price for a pint. But here, for some reason, it's cheaper, and some MPs drink before voting, and that really shocked me when I came to Parliament, because it is our workplace. Now, does the Prime Minister agree with his own MPs who've defended their right to drink cheap alcohol at work? Or does he agree with me that MPs shouldn't be drinking on the job, given that we vote on huge things like the climate crisis, disabled people's rights, housing, child poverty?
They're full, you know, she was being shouted down, and the woman behind her, who was a magistrate, believe it or not, in a previous life, was shouting, "Get a life." But she's right. There's important things. Any other workplace, if you get drunk and get pissed and go to work and try and do your work, you're going to get fired. But down there, it seems to be an accepted norm. And as someone who's been down there, back in 2015, when you guys, 56, you've been down, I went down a few days later. This is cheap as chips to get pissed. This cheapest place in London to get pissed and a good meal. I think she's right. I think it should be banned. What do you think?
Well, it was great, but what we're talking about here is a YouGov poll where the overwhelming majority of individuals who voted on this, and it's every category, you know, all adults, Greens, Lib Dems, Labour, Reform, over 70% in all of these counts think it's unacceptable for MPs to drink alcohol while working. Well, what does that really mean? Well, obviously, Angus Bren myself had a few pints there, and here's the rub.
You told me you were teetotal.
That was stood for 10.
I know. There's one incident. I'll say it now because, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. I was on top of a stool in one of the bars singing a Scottish song as we'd just arrived, and it was late in the evening. Work had finished, right? And there was a lot of spads and a lot of Tories, and they were giving us pelters. You know, they were shouting abuse at us, and I'm just sitting there singing "Will You Go, Lassie Go" and giving them the Vickies and all that kind of thing, as you do in a the working man's pub type of thing, right? Because I'm down there to end British rule. I was fully expecting it to be the last MP for Coatbridge, and I thought that's what we were there to do, and rumble them up, be the sand in their Vaseline, given the place. But anyway, so entertainment. But on a more serious note, entertainment, meeting the people, lobbyists and organisations promoting causes is a big part of politics. The hours you work, if you're working, and some do and some don't, you can be 18-hour days, you can have 16-hour days, you can be there constantly. There are functions paid by lobbyist companies who want to get their message over in politics, or who support a cause that your party is interested in, and it is incumbent upon you to attend. And there are those who abuse it, of course. There's alcoholics there, as there are in any job sometimes. But there are also those who quite rightly are entitled to let steam off and have a social drink, right? Now, the other thing, the point she made, because she's new, voting is whipped. So decisions are generally predetermined. You go in there, you're not really going to. I mean, you might not have a vote till very late in the evening, but you've been working since 7 in the morning or 8 in the morning. So you can go out, you can have a bite to eat, a glass of wine. You can go in. It's not going to change. You're not saying anything. You're going in to vote and do what you're told to do, unless you've already made a decision. Because all this is going in and yay or nay going through one of the doors. So for me, that doesn't really apply, because you already know one way or another whether you're going to go with the whip or go against it, who you're going to vote for. But I agree with her. Being in the chamber during the day, or on a committee, or debating when you're drunk or seriously intoxicated is unacceptable. But that's, I'll be honest, I didn't really see much of that. I think she's generalizing here. But however, the principle she states is correct. These are very special circumstances. Subsidies, they talked about removing them. It would just, I think, I don't know about that. It's a different argument. But I agree with her. You certainly shouldn't be in committees talking and doing this, but generally overall, there's an aspect to this that is about entertainment and promotion, and being party to big events where the issues are discussed. And that there's nothing wrong with socialising, as long as you're not being a pest or a nuisance or getting seriously drunk.
You know, I've been out with you socially, Mr. Boswell, so you know, I know what you're like. But no, I disagree. I mean, it's all very well you say a glass of wine, absolutely, but it's not. I mean, any other walk of life, and it's an example that should be getting set for the rest of the world. The British public get into trouble if they go to drink, and I personally think it's wrong. Angus, you have your saying it. You were down there longer than anyone.
Yeah, I mean, I remember one time. Firstly, I think if you're a new MP and you want attention, you say something like this, and it certainly worked. She's got attention. I remember one time speaking to John Bercow after he'd made some huge virtue signal about ending subsidised food or lowering subsidies in food, and I told him this was a great thing he'd just done. He looked at me a bit perplexed and says, "Yeah, John, is brilliant because the queues have gone down. The staff are no longer queuing for their food, and MPs can get their food a lot easier." And of course, he just thought of the headline. He's doing something about MPs, and he's thinking that this is going to be some sort of kudos for him. But actually, what matters in the Westminster estate, I think there's 5,000 to 7,000 people in there every day, was fewer of the staff were affording to go for food. They felt that the food had become more expensive. So that was the end. That certainly affected a percentage of that to the benefit of MPs who didn't have to queue as long. Now, MPs have the privilege down there of being able to jump in front of queues of food, but I don't think any did or would do that in front of staff of any party were doing that. On the alcohol side, yeah, it is definitely cheaper, but you know, you find a lot out. You know, I found out from over a pint, from Conservative MPs, I had 2 Conservative MPs really arguing with each other about whether Scotland would become independent in an election or not. One said he couldn't because it would be illegal. Another saying, look, law follows democracy. And I found out, coming up the 2014 referendum, loads of Scottish Labour MPs, I remember one memorably told me, look, I want Cuba to be independent. I quite want Venezuela being independent. Why wouldn't I want Scotland to be independent? But I can't say that at the moment. There's also a lot of party whipping being followed. That, by the way, applies to a certain amount of people I know in the current Scottish Cabinet who did it on gender. They couldn't really care. They just followed the party whip. And I think another something else I remember finding out at a reception was something Phil said. There was a reception with a wee bit of champagne one evening, and Amber Rudd said, and not saying Amber Rudd had any drink or not, but I probably had a glass of champagne in my hand listening to this. It might have been sparkling wine, but she said Brexit was for the bees, but 2 to 3 weeks before the Brexit referendum, and then she had to tour along with Brexit. You find out an awful lot of things, but also I think it helped lower the tribalism. You know, we did know people across party lines, and I sometimes see Holyrood, and I don't think they're able to stop being tribal and generally a bit caustic with each other outside. And I think what Phil said, you know, the times you're working as an MP, well, you're really an MP for the 5 years, morning, noon and night, for the 5 years. So you really are working at that morning, noon and night. So, yeah, it's a difficult one, you know. If it's any good news to anybody, apparently I've been down there 2 or 3 times since, and Labour don't trust each other. So nobody's socialising in case anybody says something off colour and they get reported. So I think it's taking care of itself. Now, whatever that lady's saying, she's probably saying the sort of things that were the cliches of the past that apply to Westminster. But as Phil was saying, you know, I think in Chamber Committee or general debating, we didn't really see anything major. You know, I think there was one time, was it Mark Reckless or something? Was he there when you were there, Phil? He was a new Tory MP, and he got a little bitty, shall we say, tired and emotional was the phrase they had on the terrace one night. But on the whole, there were never really problems with alcohol. There was one MP who retired. He'll remain nameless at the moment, but he used to drink Jameson's, and one of the bars there, I think it was Strangers. It was Strangers. They had Jameson's queuing up, and nobody could figure out why. It was bottles and bottles of Jameson's until they figured out it was the fellow who'd retired. He used to drink the Jameson's all the time. He was quite a nice bloke himself, and he was a very thoroughly decent man of principles, an MP for an English constituency, and a friend of Scottish independence as well.
I've just got to say there's many reasons why I could never be a Member of Parliament, but bevy a pound a pint and a lot of Tories and Labour unions I'd have made Eric Joyce would have been my wingman. I'd have been knocking them out left, right and centre. That'd be terrible. Anyway, here we go. Listen, we've well overshot the runway again. Thanks, Angus, for your input in here. It's great. I didn't even have to ask you a question, which is great.
Can I just say, I hope colleagues forgive me with my divisive interjections.
No, it's been excellent stuff. And to you all, I hope you all enjoyed this as much as I have. And until we see you again, which actually, because the amount of time we've overrun won't be too long, you and yours, take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.